Subversive and proto-feminist are not descriptors that typically come to mind when thinking about Mark Twain. Yet in the little-known story I'm about to share concerning his long-standing association with a group of young women called the Saturday Morning Club of Hartford, these traits emerge quite forcefully and add a surprising new dimension to the author's already complex, multifaceted character. The club's origins can be traced back to a chance conversation at a dinner party in early April 1876. The hosts were Clemens's attorney, Charles Enoch Perkins, and his wife Lucy, who lived about 3 blocks from the Clemens mansion on rural Woodland Street. The occasion's guest of honor was James T. Fields, Howell's predecessor as editor of the Atlantic Monthly and a partner in the prestigious Boston publishing firm of Ticknor and Fields, who was then visiting the city for a series of weekly lectures. Sam and Livy Clemens rounded out the guest list. The Perkinses were the parents of 5 children, the oldest of whom were daughters Mary and Emily. At age 19, Mary had already finished her secondary schooling. Emily, at 15, wasn't far behind. Over the course of the meal, Lucy expressed concern about the lack of opportunities for fostering her daughter's continued intellectual growth once their formal education was complete. In response, Fields offered a suggestion. Had the Perkinses ever heard of an organization called the Saturday Morning Club of Boston, founded 5 years earlier by activist Julia Ward Howe for just this purpose, the edification of the city's young elite women? Although childless himself, Fields was an enthusiastic proponent of the group and had lectured to its members on numerous occasions. Lucy wondered aloud if such a club could be established in Hartford, and Fields replied that he didn't see why not. Clemens spontaneously agreed to help, never dreaming, I imagine, of the profound depth of his later immersion in their activities. In a whirlwind of activity over the next 3 weeks, Mary and Emily invited 16 schoolmates and friends to join the new association and asked Fields to serve as their inaugural speaker. On May 6th, he reprised a talk presented several months earlier to the Boston Club on the contemporary British humorist Thomas Hood, and the Saturday Morning Club of Hartford was officially born. The Hartford group's charter hewed closely to that of the Boston original, outlining a series of weekly meetings from early October until late May for the express purpose of promoting culture and social intercourse. The sessions alternated between formal lectures, to which friends and neighbors were invited, hence they were co-ed, and discussions, which were strictly limited to the female members themselves. Membership represented a serious commitment. Attendance was taken, tardiness fined, and absences assessed as either excusable or willful by the club's officers, and was regarded as a privilege that could be summarily revoked after 3 willful absences in 2 months. Moreover, the rules governing the group's discussions reveal that they were hardly casual or spontaneous conversations. In other words, not really discussions at all. Papers, each occupying 5 minutes in length, were prepared in advance on a previously assigned topic, and then read aloud in lockstep order, beginning at the right of the chair, unless otherwise directed by the presiding officer. And woe betide any member who failed to produce an essay, a stiff fine of 50 cents. Mark Twain plunged headlong into this budding enterprise, addressing the club on at least 15 different occasions between its founding and the family's departure from Hartford in 1891. He also actively enlisted colleagues, such as Bret Harte, William Dean Howells, and George Washington Cable, to speak to the young women as well. Significantly, in the annual programs the club printed to commemorate and preserve the eclectic range of their intellectual forays. There's a sample there. This one's from the opening season. He is always listed as Mr. S.L. Clemens. And for those of you who are just in Jeff Steinbrink's session, this topic of Twain versus Clemens came up in a really interesting way. He's never, not once, listed under his nom de plume. His first talk was conventional enough, concerning a British historian whose work he admired, Thomas Babington Macaulay. Almost immediately, however, he chafed at the prescribed stricture of promoting culture and began to take risks, using the young women as a sounding board for his own creative endeavors. For example, during the second year of the club's existence, he read aloud chapters from an as yet unnamed work in progress, The Prince and the Pauper, as it turned out, carefully gauging their responses and revising his manuscript accordingly. In many respects, the young women proved to be his ideal audience, bright, eager, open-minded, receptive. The club members thus became an extension of the so-called charmed circle of female family members gathered on the porch at Quarry Farm, to whom he read aloud from his day's work on summer evenings. He shared early versions of published nonfiction essays and sketches with the club as well, such as On the Decay and the Art of Lying, Mental Telegraphy, and English as She is Taught. Additionally, the club's programs contain the titles of several unpublished and as yet unrecovered pieces, such as a lecture on banquets in December 1879. Over time, Clemens developed a deep camaraderie and rapport with the club members, to the extent that they sought his counsel on all manner of things. In the spring of 1880, for example, as the lecture committee struggled to identify appropriate speakers for the next season, its chair, Emily Perkins, turned to Mr. Clemens. Among the names that had apparently been proposed was that of Bloodgood Cutter, whom the writer had met on the 1867 Quaker City excursion. Though Emily's original letter of inquiry has not survived, his response has. Dear Miss Perkins, yes, it is the same mildewed idiot. His friends call him a lunatic, but that is pretty fulsome flattery. One cannot become an idiot without first having brains. Yes, he is the poet laureate. Truly yours, S.L. Clemens. The candor of this reply bespeaks a familiarity that, to my mind, is nothing short of extraordinary, particularly in light of the strict Victorian mores governing polite discourse and social etiquette between the sexes. Not surprisingly, Mr. Cutter did not receive an invitation to lecture in the aftermath of this communication. The young women also solicited Mr. Clemens's advice on a far thornier conundrum. Given the highly scripted nature of the club's ostensible discussions, these sessions had proven problematic from their inception, marked by tedium and dread. Overriding the gendered firewall that restricted attendance to female members, the officers took the bold step of inviting Mark Twain to a discussion meeting sometime in either 1879 or early 1880 in the hope of identifying a solution. The innovation he proposed represents nothing short of a revolution. As Annie Elliott Trumbull, one of the club's founding members, recalled on the occasion of its 50th anniversary in 1926, Mr. Clemens alone, outside of the active membership, was invited to a discussion meeting, and we had ample reason to be grateful for his presence, in that he urged us, and it must have been at the cost of some personal sacrifice, to speak without preparation on the subject of the day. Unfortunately, no documentary evidence survives indicating exactly how Clemens affected this dramatic change. However, a long, unsent February 1882 letter to Miss Mary Cordelia Noyes offers some suggestion. leads. Noyes, who was then a senior at the Buffalo Female Academy, the very same school for which Mark Twain and David Gray served as judges in a student composition contest back in 1870, had sent the author a copy of the student newspaper that she had recently founded, containing an editorial about an after-school writing club to which she and a number of her friends belonged. Dear Miss Noyes, you've got a Thursday class. It is a good thing. We've got a young girls' club here too. It is 6 or 7 years old. I've been a member of it from the start, and I'm the only girl of my sex that is. They waived sex in my case because they preferred solid wisdom to perfunctory technicalities. At first, we girls did as you are doing now, crammed for a subject and brought in brief essays upon it, but that grew wearying. So we don't read essays anymore, we talk. Talking is the thing. To be able to talk with vigor and facility is worth heaps. Yes, and we found it was desperately uphill work too, to speak up and say your say in the presence of 20 watchful, silent girls along at first. We were so scared that if we had an opinion, we couldn't get it out. It is a good thing to pack one's system full of information, but it is an almost invaluable thing to be able to talk it with ease and interestingly upon sudden call. We have one brief essay. The rest of the time is given to offhand discussion of it. Our first attempt was a failure. The young lady chose the strong side of her question and wrote an essay that didn't leave much to be said, and nothing was said. But now, after 2 years of practice, that apparently strong essay would be handsomely riddled if it were brought before our girls again. Nowadays, we make the essay untenable. It takes the feeble side of a question and leaves the strong side to the assaulting forces. You ought to see us girls on the warpath once with such an objective as that. Ah, it is excellent practice. The club's 1880-1881 discussion program shows exactly when this sea change took place. Session number 8, which occurred on February 5th, 1881. So you can see the full year's program there, and then I've enlarged the section that I want to talk about. When instead of a series of scripted formal essays, Samuel Clemens opened the topic of conscience as superior to logic in matters of morals. And as you can see from glancing at the sessions for the remainder of the season, and indeed continuing for decades after Mark Twain's time in Hartford, conversations were opened by Miss E. Barnard, Miss Beach, Miss Foster, etc. Unfortunately, his remarks on conscience do not appear to have survived. However, last year, I found a document in the fragments file at the Mark Twain papers containing remarks that I am convinced were made to the Saturday Morning Club. So here is the 1881-1882 lecture program, which indicates that some 9 months after introducing his radical change in the club's discussion sessions, he modeled the strategy outlined in his 1882 letter to Mary Noyes, blurring the distinction between lecture and discussion formats. He presented an untenable series of pronouncements on liberty that deliberately espoused the the feeble side of the question in order to leave the strong side to the assaulting forces and set his female audience on the warpath. My next 4 slides illustrate his technique, a series of rapid-fire questions and provocative, progressively outrageous assertions designed to elicit a chorus of spirited responses. In this manner, he cultivated an atmosphere of risk-taking and intellectual play, treating the young women not as deferential acolytes, but peers and sparring partners. by empowering them to speak extemporaneously and say their say, questioning the implied authority of his role not only as lecturer, but as a world-famous author. He encouraged the development of their independent critical thinking skills. Now, you'll notice here on this slide that there are some pencil annotations at the top. Those were made by Albert Bigelow Paine. Okay, that's not Clemens's handwriting. So what is liberty? What is it today in this country? And how old? 15 or 16 years old? Wait, what? Not 1776? Think about the significance of Clemens's implied date, 1865, when the Civil War ended. While the United States may have become a republic in the 18th century, liberty, he insinuates, did not exist until slavery ended, as specified in his second point, for there was slavery before. Can it be destroyed, ever? No, no church. Positing organized religion as an existential threat to the existence of liberty among a group of conventionally devout young women, some of whom were the daughters of ministers, such a statement represents not merely a challenge, but a deliberate affront. How did it originate here? Accident. Again, the same rhetorical strategy. What about the mythic master narrative of the American colonists overthrowing tyranny, rebelling against the flagrant injustice of taxation without representation? Nah, American independence was simply an accident. Suppose we had 2 dukes and 3 earls in 1783. Was it? That parenthetical question is, to my mind, a theatrical gesture, a pose of wavering and uncertainty that offers an irresistible invitation for his listeners to actively enter into the conversation, to collaborate, corroborate, or challenge in an exhilarating exchange of ideas. Where the telegraph and press and railway go, the only true and worthy missionaries, liberty surely spreads. Technology, not politics, not representative government as the vanguard of freedom. Another bold move. The notation at the bottom of this slide, see current paragraph, alluding to Hartford's leading newspaper, offers key evidence of the local venue in which these remarks were originally made. An excerpt, perhaps impulsively torn from that morning's edition and interjected into his remarks, adds to the dynamic improvisational performance that he's modeling for the club's members. Without question, the final page of Twain's lecture notes offers his most provocative assertion. Religious liberty is liberty to detach your mind from one form of slavery or chain it to another. Or rather, let me say that again. Religious liberty is liberty to detach your mind from one form of slavery, to chain it to another, or rather, to go around and rechain it to the same thing, but in a little different place. Liberty to cease from being the persecuted person and become the persecutor. In the immortal words of the Duke regarding his handbill for the Royal Nonsuch Theatre, if that line don't fetch them, I don't know Arkansas. And fetch them it did. The young women embraced Mr. Clemens's innovation and made it their own, as this 1892 program indicates, with 2 members serving as a tag team, one offering brief remarks on a historical topic, and another riffing a contemporary variation on it. Look, for example, at the bottom here, the session held on November 12th, 1892, when Miss Powell introduced the subject of the colonial Indian, which segued into a politically charged discussion on the Indian of today and our duty to him, led by Miss Lucy Mather. The story of Mark Twain's involvement with the Saturday Morning Club of Hartford is rich and multifaceted. Time necessitates that I've left a great deal here unsaid. But in closing, I would like to mention two astonishing facts. First, that the club still exists today, 146 years after its founding. And secondly, that at each meeting, members leave a conspicuously placed vacant chair to honor the memory of their beloved patron saint, Mr. S.L. Clemens. Thank you.